There's a hidden piece of data in Red Bull's telemetry that completely changes how we should interpret Max Verstappen's race in Australia. Because if you only look at the final result, it seems like a lackluster race. But if you look at the car's internal data, the story is very different. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Do you think this year's Red Bull is really slow, or have we simply not yet seen its true potential? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more analyses like this. In this video, we're going to analyze what the Red Bull's technical data from the Australian Grand Prix really reveals. Not just the on-track result, but what the telemetry, energy management, and Verstappen's own statements show. Because when you put all those pieces together, a very clear conclusion emerges. The RB22 didn't run close to its true limit in Melbourne. The key to understanding Verstappen's race in Melbourne is that the final result is misleading if analyzed without context. Sixth place, and more than 50 seconds behind the leader seemed to indicate a race with no real chances, but when you reconstruct the entire weekend, a much more complex narrative emerges. Red Bull arrived at Albert Park with a new car that was still being understood by the technical team, with a hybrid system completely different from previous seasons, and with an aerodynamic operating window that wasn't yet fully optimized. In that scenario, each session of the weekend became more of a learning process than a pure attempt to maximize immediate performance, This was reflected in how the team managed the car from practice to the race. Qualifying was the first moment where this reality became evident. The RB22 didn't show the usual stability or confidence that Verstappen had displayed in previous years when pushing the car to the limit on fast laps. The gap of nearly 0.8 of a second to the benchmark Mercedes made it clear that the car's balance wasn't yet at its ideal. On circuits like Albert Park, where fast corners demand very precise front-end control and extremely stable rear-end control, any slight lack of driver confidence immediately translates into lost lap time. Verstappen's crash in that session reinforced the impression that the car still has a delicate handling when pushed to the limit. When the race began, the strategic scenario was very different from what a world champion with a dominant car usually faces. Verstappen had to work his way up from the back of the grid on a circuit where traffic seriously compromises aerodynamic performance. Every lap behind other cars meant dirty air, higher tire temperatures, and less downforce on the front axle. Even so, the Dutchman's execution was extraordinarily precise. He chose his attacking moments perfectly, managed tire degradation effectively, and used the hybrid system intelligently to complete overtakes on the circuit's longest straights. This strategy allowed him to build a steady climb back to sixth place, a result that, in purely competitive terms, was far more solid than it appears when looking at the final standings. After the race came one of the most revealing statements of the entire weekend. Verstappen explained that the deficit compared to Mercedes and Ferrari didn't stem from a single, specific problem, but rather from a combination of factors affecting both the chassis and the power unit. When engineers and analysts began studying the complete Grand Prix data, a pattern emerged that isn't apparent from an outsider's perspective. For a significant portion of the stints, the RB22 wasn't utilizing the full potential of its electric system on the straights. This is an extremely important detail because in modern Formula One, hybrid power isn't used constantly but is strategically managed throughout each lap. Speed and GPS data show that, compared to the Mercedes leading the race, Verstappen released less electrical energy during extended periods of the race, indicating that the team was operating the car within a more conservative safety window while gathering data on the behavior of the new hybrid system. This approach has a very logical explanation when considering the technical context of the RB22. Red Bull is working with its first engine developed in conjunction with Ford under entirely new regulations, meaning that the energy system management is still being calibrated. In these early races of the season, teams typically prioritize reliability and understanding energy maps over outright performance. For this reason, many of Verstappen's laps show controlled battery usage with shorter electric bursts and particularly aggressive energy recovery under braking, allowing the battery to remain in a safe charging zone throughout the race. However, the most revealing moment came in the final stages of the Grand Prix. In that final stint, the data shows a clear change in the car's behavior. The RB22 began to unleash more electric power on the straights, top speeds increased, and lap times started to drop progressively. This performance boost cannot be explained solely by lower fuel consumption or track evolution. What analysts interpret is that the team allowed the car to get a little closer to its true potential once they had gathered sufficient data on the hybrid system's behavior during the race. The telemetry also reveals another interesting detail related to Verstappen's driving style. On several corner exits, the Dutchman applied the throttle more progressively than in previous seasons. This type of throttle application usually indicates that the driver is still exploring the car's traction limits. Even with these limitations, the data reveals something that could worry the other teams. Because when Verstappen's long runs are analyzed, a strength of the RB22 emerges that could become very dangerous as the season progresses. If there's one thing that starts to stand out when reviewing Verstappen's long runs in Australia, it's the consistency of his race pace when the car has clear air. During several phases of the Grand Prix, especially when he managed to clear the traffic, the RB22 began to set surprisingly consistent lap times. They weren't times to fight the leading Mercedes, but they were very solid times that placed him close to the pace of Ferrari and McLaren in comparable conditions. This is a very important indicator because in Formula One, race pace usually reveals a car's true potential much more than qualifying, where factors such as tire temperature, momentary aerodynamic balance, or even traffic can distort the actual performance of the package. Another positive sign appears in tire management. Verstappen's consecutive laps show fairly controlled tire degradation during his mid-stints, something that has historically been one of Red Bull's greatest strengths. When a car manages its tires well, it not only maintains pace for longer, but it also opens up many more strategic options during the race. This allows the team to decide when to attack with an undercut, when to extend a stint to take advantage of a safety car, or when to push in the closing laps with still competitive tires. In Australia, even with a car that wasn't fully tuned, the RB22 demonstrated that it maintains this ability to conserve performance over long runs. Another technical aspect is also beginning to emerge that could become a significant advantage throughout the season. The efficiency of the energy recovery system appears to be particularly strong on the RB22. Braking data shows that the car is able to recover a considerable amount of energy in the deceleration zones without significantly compromising the car's stability. This means the battery can stay charged for longer, giving the driver greater freedom to decide when to use the electric boost at strategic moments during a lap. In races where overtaking depends on just a few extra kilometers per hour on the straights, this ability to choose the exact moment to release energy can make all the difference. But while the data also reveals clear strengths, there's another side to the story that explains why Red Bull was so far from victory in Australia. The RB22 also revealed structural weaknesses that the team will have to address. The nearly 0.8 of a second difference compared to the benchmark Mercedes is a clear indication that the RB22 still doesn't generate the necessary downforce in fast corners, or it doesn't do so consistently enough when the driver tries to push to the limit. The second issue relates to the car's operating window. Everything suggests that the RB22 requires a very specific setup to deliver its best performance, meaning that small variations in track temperature, aerodynamic balance, or energy management can significantly alter the car's behavior. When a car has too narrow an operating window, the driver must constantly adapt to changes in the car's balance during the lap. This explains why Verstappen was more cautious with the throttle and why the car seemed more difficult to push to the limit compared to the Mercedes, which displayed much more stable handling throughout the weekend. Another important factor was the RB22's sensitivity to traffic. During several phases of the race, when Verstappen was running behind other cars, the car's performance dropped noticeably. Dirty air reduces available downforce and increases the temperature of the front tires, leading to a loss of grip in fast corners. In a car that already has a delicate balance window, this effect is amplified even further. This forced Verstappen to manage his overtaking maneuvers very carefully, waiting for the precise moment to attack on the straights where the impact of dirty air is less and the hybrid system can compensate for some of the aerodynamic loss. Finally, the issue Verstappen himself mentioned after the race comes to light. The deficit the team perceives is split between the chassis and the power unit. This combination explains why the car not only loses time in fast corners, but also in certain acceleration phases where other teams seem to have a more immediate response from their hybrid systems. When a driver describes a problem divided among several technical areas, it usually means the entire package still needs development before reaching its true competitive potential. And when all these pieces are put together, the final picture of the RB22 in Australia becomes much clearer. It's not a dominant car yet, but neither is it a car that has shown everything it's capable of. With all this on the table, the big question is no longer whether Red Bull was slow in Australia. The real question is something else. To what extent does that performance represent the RB22's true potential? The final result suggests a car clearly behind Mercedes, but the data tells a more complex story. The RB22 is still not operating within its optimal window, and for much of the race, the team ran the car with conservative energy management while gathering key information from the new hybrid system. This means that the performance we saw in Melbourne likely doesn't represent the car's true potential, but rather a still-contained version of what the technical package can offer when fully understood. It's also clear that the Verstappen factor remains one of Red Bull's greatest weapons at this early stage of the championship. Even with a car that wasn't ready to fight for the win, he was able to build a smart comeback, avoid mistakes in traffic, and maximize every strategic opportunity during the race. There's a strong belief within the team that the car has potential, and that confidence isn't accidental. The wind tunnel and simulator data seem to correlate reasonably well with what they're seeing on track, meaning that areas for improvement have already been identified. If Red Bull manages to widen the aerodynamic operating window, improve the hybrid system's response, and give the driver a more predictable rear and exiting corners, the RB22 could quickly transform into a much more competitive car. And that's where the big question mark left by Australia arises. If the Red Bull we saw in Melbourne was still far from its ideal, then the true benchmark for the championship could change in just a few races. Because when a team with Red Bull's technical capabilities starts unlocking its car's potential, the performance leap can be much faster than the rest of the grid expects. Now I want to know your opinion. Do you think Red Bull is still holding back some of the RB22's potential, or has Mercedes truly taken technical control of this new era of Formula One? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.